Everybody is feeling this because the amount of cheating going on is insane. And like the old way of hiring just is completely broken.
Welcome to the Talking AI podcast, where we talk AI with both experts in the field and early adopters. I'm your host, Matt Page, and we're here to demystify AI for you so you can get some value from it. Let's talk some AI. Interviewing in the age of AI has gotten completely crazy. Candidates are using everything from ChatGPT to cheating bots to, I wouldn't be surprised if we got people using AI avatars to do interviews for them. And I even saw somebody the other day using an AI avatar for a virtual court hearing, which is just mind blowing. But what does all this mean? It means it's super hard to vet somebody for a role you're hiring for. But our guest today, Ken Schumacher, founder of Ropes AI, is building a way to solve that, but not really in the way you would think. Welcome to Talking AI, Ken.
Yeah, super great to be here. Cheating, it's a negative thing, but there's a lot positive and negative going on in the AI world. And yeah, excited to hop on and jam with
you. Yeah, man, I'm excited about this topic too. I want to start with an anecdote from the other day, because there's several rabbit holes I want to jump through. But I was at a Starbucks. They have the communal tables you sit at, and there's like this group of high school students across the table. And I just overheard them. Every other thing out of their mouth was, "Oh, let's ask ChatGPT. What has ChatGPT said?" And being the curious person I am, I was like, okay, I got to ask them, how often are you using ChatGPT to do your homework? And I'm curious, what percentage do you think they said?
I'm going to go, knowing what I would do when I was in high school, I'm going to go like 80, something crazy high.
They 100%. Like,
Jeez.
It was not even like a hesitation. They're like, oh,
all of
100%. Yeah. But like, I say that because it led me, I did a video on it and it got lots of comments and feedback, but it's like this path you have from teacher to student to AI back to teacher, and the student isn't doing much. All that to say, I think what y'all are doing with Ropes, and I want to hear your philosophy on this, is you're not trying to necessarily restrict AI in the process, which is, it's logical, but I think it's hard for people to wrap their mind around, because in the job, you're going to be using AI. Like, why are you trying to stop it in the interview process? I'm curious, give me your philosophy on this. I'm curious, like, what was that kind of moment you had that led you to say, okay, I need to create this thing because there's this gap in the market?
Yeah, no, 1,000%. And thanks for having me on. It'll be fun. Yeah, the homework thing is very timely. I just got back from GSV ASU, which our investors is kind of the biggest ed tech conference in the world. I think there's
cool,
tens of thousands of folks, and this is on everybody's mind. Is listen, like, people are going to use these tools for better or for worse. They're not going to go away. And just as we've had the change course before, it's happening again. It is what it is. I think that's a lot of my underlying thesis. It's like, these tools are here to stay, whether any of us like it or not. And they're not just here to stay, but they're actually going to keep getting better and better. My founding story of Ropes, again, I was on the interviewing side. I worked at a startup called Retool. I got to lead a lot of AI projects for them, which was a blast. Except for 1 hour, 2 hours a day, I had to hop in a phone booth and I was giving the same old sort of interview problem. And this was right when ChatGPT had just first come out. GPT 3.5 was out. And these tools could do some amount of things, but a lot of the candidates I was meeting with were cheating the old-fashioned way. Our problem was posted online. People would go look it up, practice it, come in and crush it. And again, I didn't even really blame those candidates or those students. In your case, I did the same thing when I was a student. People are trying to get a job or trying to finish their homework, right? It's hard to blame people in that position. But anyway, I watched hundreds of these, and you can imagine I'm working on LLM tools. I'm running a bunch of rather boring interviews. That kind of got me thinking about the combination of the two, and that's where Ropes was born from. I would say when you think about Ropes, it's really a pretty simple idea, and I think of it on two phases. One, there's a reason why I was in those interviews, right? Like, interviews are biased. They're not perfect, but they work. They work in the sense that if I watch you code or I watch you work for an hour, I have a pretty good read, at least technically, of who you are and where you might excel and where you don't. And that comes out through something I call vibes, but it's really all of these like subtle signals, like how somebody approaches a problem or what they do when something goes wrong, all that stuff. Our bet is that large language models can pick up on those same things just like a human can. So we're trying to build these async sort of challenges that give the same amount of insights as a live interview. I bring up the second phase because AI is a big part of that. We are not believers in, and we do have all of these anti-cheating tools, and obviously we're aware of what candidates are up to, right? But you're going to use AI on the job, right? So especially in the practical domains, let's build tests where people are encouraged to go use LLMs. Let's see how well they can steer them. Maybe later, let's educate them on how they can use these models better, but these things aren't going away. I think that's a lot of my underlying thesis.
Yeah, it's you mentioned the comment earlier, they're only going to get better.
Yep.
And I had an engineer from Stripe on the podcast the other week, and it's probably
Yep.
an episode, probably one or two or so before this, if anybody wants to go check it out. But that was what he mentioned. This is as bad as it's going to be today, and you
Right.
have to have that framing in your mind. It's so critical, and what he did is he basically somebody put out a tweet about how expensive DocuSign is. So he's like, oh, I'm just going to go build it. He took
Sure.
2 days. He built a clone of just a version of DocuSign because it's a very simple thing at the end of the
Yeah.
day. And then that went viral. It's, I'll just bring it to market. It's got like thousands of people. It's just a free alternative to DocuSign, this like huge publicly traded
Yeah.
company, which that in itself, I want to get into some of that too, like how teams are different in startups with you being a startup as well. But
Yeah.
you mentioned, I think the other thing too that's interesting is new companies today they're building things with AI from the start. Like when you think about building ropes, AI is native to the entire experience, I'm assuming,
100%.
versus incumbents, they're kind of like, oh, how do I weave AI into my existing solution? They graft it on. It's like this kind of just bolted on thing. But I'm curious, like, what's your take there? And you're relatively speaking, newer in your career, but what has that been like starting from zero? Because this is your first startup, I believe.
It is.
What is it like from starting from zero with AI as a tool that you can use? Like, how did that like? What was that process like as you were thinking through the problem with this
Yeah.
new novel thing?
Yeah. To be honest, I think it's a huge advantage. I have a couple things. First, I think people underestimate how effective these tools are. Remember, I started the company over a year and a half ago. At that
Yeah.
point, the models they were I still thought they were incredibly good, but they were nothing near where we are today. They could
But
write.
you saw the writing on the wall. That's the key thing, right? That's the
Yeah,
big thing.
a lot of
And you
it's
were
the
able to get ahead
slope.
of it.
Yeah, a lot
Yeah.
of it's the slope.
Mhm.
Like, we're lucky right now. I think the hiring point where you kicked us off is, like, extremely visceral. Everybody is feeling this because the amount of cheating going on is insane, and, like, the old way of hiring just is completely broken and doesn't work
Yeah.
anymore. But the slope of that was obvious, I think, in 2023 or even before. 23 is when I picked it up. I think it was
Yeah.
awful even before that. But I go back to from a team perspective, from, like, me building the V0, the product perspective, people underestimate
Mhm.
how helpful these tools are because they're really helpful at the early stage. If
Yeah.
you're a software engineer at Google, you have a giant code base. You have a ton of reviews. There's
Mhm.
a ton of context, right? These models probably aren't particularly helpful on like day-to-day dev work. Maybe I'm sure they still are, but you're still doing a lot of the work yourself because the complexity is not going and writing a bunch of code. It's
Mhm.
writing in the line with what already exists and the necessary approvals and what have you.
Yeah.
When I was starting ropes, there are no approvals. I'm the approver, right? And there's no context to really pick up on the repo because I'm building it from scratch, right? You can drive these things extremely quickly. And that's where you hear a DocuSign MVP, you could probably spin up very fast, right?
Mhm.
Because you're moving from zero. So first, people underestimate how helpful these models are when you're kind of like very early on. The other thing that you mentioned on incumbents, I think is like really interesting. And it's hard to generalize because I do think in many verticals, incumbents have an advantage. Obviously, they have like distribution, right?
Right. For
Yeah,
that.
it's very nuanced depending on where you are. But I do think your point is salient. I think of, not to keep bringing up Google, but I think of like Perplexity versus Google. I'm a user of both. I think there are times where the Google search gets the job done. There are other times where I'd opt for Perplexity, which I think does like an incredible AI search.
Mhm.
If you're Google, you have built an entire company around the former, right? So it's very hard for you to conceptualize and go forward with kind of throwing out the old guard and throwing in something new, right?
Yep.
It's hard to move backwards to your point. And you can see where people kind of like slap it on or what have you. But one, functionally, it's difficult to go rewrite the product. Two, you have a ton of customers that are happy with what exists today. You don't want to go to them and admit that you're wrong, right? So that's an area where like it's easy for Perplexity. People who are going to AI search are there for AI search. So I
Yeah.
do think that startups have some advantages, but yeah, it's a dogfight for sure.
I do think you mentioned the example of the incumbents using AI. Obviously, if you're starting from nothing, it's just you. It's, hey, let me go ask my coworker. That's you basically in AI. But I think there is still opportunity to solve it in large companies. And I've chatted with some folks on this. It's just a different type of problem that AI can be applied to, i.e., like when I have a very large code base, lots of dependencies and things like that. AI is still very well suited to solve that, but it has to be like defined, architected in terms of how best to do it. But I, the point you mentioned though is it's so freeing. It's like democratizing in a sense to where anybody can go prototype, build something, and bring it to market very quickly to validate it. And I think that's the key thing is you can get to validation very quick.
It's beautiful, and I do think there are incumbents that do this really well. A
Yeah.
company I'm very bullish on, Ramp puts out their every month, I think they put out their fastest growing company by card spend.
Yeah.
And the fastest growing by spend in April was not, Cursor, or I think by number of customers, Cursor was on the list, but by cash, it was HubSpot. So
Yeah.
there are interesting examples of incumbents who have the distribution advantage and can ship this stuff really quickly. I think it's actually like an interesting like practice to go through and figure out like why are they doing so well versus why are the ones that aren't. I think part of
You look at their
prioritization.
CTO, and I don't know how much he's still involved, but Dharmesh, he has this agent network that he's created.
It's
It's
crazy.
basically instead of hiring people, you go to this agent network and you can hire agents or build agents. It's just this marketplace for agents. So it's like when you have those innovative people in there, and even Google, man, like some of the stuff they're coming out with. I don't know if you saw yesterday or the day before, they now have like their Firebase, I think Firebase Studio they call it, which is like their version of V0 or Lovable, where it's just very easy to build and it's
Crazy.
directly integrated with Firebase for the backend authentication, all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, I think your point
Um,
is great, which is like democratizing is like the great word. Like people can
yeah,
move up very quickly. I encourage my non-technical friends to go into a V0 and just see if you can build something. It's like a very
yeah,
rewarding process. So yeah, it's cool.
yeah. So you mentioned something earlier, the idea of like vibe, like in the interview, how they're thinking through problems, and like vibe coding's the big thing right now. But I think there is this essence of like how you problem solve. But I'm curious, like the skills, people aren't only using AI like in the interview process, they're using in the job, which means the skills you need in the future are different than the ones you needed before. So like curious from your perspective, being a tool that helps with interviews, how do you start to think about assessing AI skills? And when I say AI skills, I don't mean like data scientist, AI, ML engineer. I mean like your ability to work with AI tools, orchestrate
Yeah.
AI tools. Like, where do you see that going? And then how do companies start to assess that? Because it's very new.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. And it's like one of the most common use cases that we see on the platform,
Yeah.
especially when we're working with startups or earlier teams. Look, at Ropes, we're trying to hire great engineers who can drive these models really quickly. I think earlier this week I was on a panel, and the panel is called like hiring for slow. I think the takeaway is that we all know that AI is going to be a bigger and bigger part of our lives, especially when we think about what we're doing on our jobs, especially in software development. But we don't know what that future is going to look like, right? So when you're
Yeah.
hiring people, we don't want to hire necessarily that you're perfect at Java syntax, something like that, right? But I want to hire people who are flexible, are agile. And when these new tools come out in 2027 and 8, they're going to adopt them really quickly. I think we have some opinions of like how to do that. Again, it's a very common use case. The first thing I'll say is we allow AI usage. That is
Yeah.
like a lot of the bar to begin with. It is up to our customers. Some of our customers prefer not to use it, but for the majority of customers on
Yeah.
Road, you can allow and steer these AI models however you want. That's half the battle, right? In my opinion. And the challenge on our side is creating problems where that is possible. If you can
Mhm.
go plug a problem into an LLM in one shot and you get the right answer, then it's hard to allow AI. But if we can build kind of these real world environment challenges where you're steering these models, that's where you can allow and encourage usage. The second thing I'll say is that the types of problems are different. And I foreshadowed it there, but we're trying, and again, we're not trying to test like, do you know perfect syntax? But we're trying to
Yeah.
test kind of things that are more design related. Can you take a user story and implement a front end from it, right?
Mhm.
Knowing what I want to see in the application, can you go steer a Veer Zero to build something that's cool and interesting, right? How
Yeah.
quick can you do that? Do you stumble on your way? Do you catch these models when they fall off guards? The problems themselves, I would say, are a little higher level, a little more design related. They definitely encourage AI usage. And
Yeah.
then we're looking at how well are you able to steer these models, and I think that'll adapt and continue as we move on over the next few years.
Yeah, and I think that's the core element. Like we have our generative driven development methodology, and there's some core principles we talk about, but it's that idea of like you're the orchestrator, AI is kind of executing the task, but your ability to have that conversation with AI and then how you approach that conversation is critical because I think a lot of people when they use it, they're like, it's almost like they're a dictator telling AI, go do this, go do that, but they're not having that contextual conversation. with AI in a sense.
Yeah, a lot of
Uh,
it too is like it's easy to do well when they're on the right track, but they all fall
yeah,
off. And are you able to go catch it and push it back? And when do you do that? Like those are types of
yeah, exactly. And with ropes specifically,
yeah.
so there's an element of the tools. Talk us through this because I'm curious. It's creating unique and customized tests effectively for the interviewee to take. So it's
Yep.
not like some off the shelf template thing. You're leveraging AI to create this customized test in a sense. How does that work? And then I think that's like the other unlock that people like listeners like the thing you need to think about is the ability to customize has just been made so much easier with AI, which opens up millions of different use cases and businesses and problems that can be solved because you can get very unique in terms of what you're customizing for.
Yeah, I think this is what's always excited me about AI and ML and NLP. I was leading AI projects at Microsoft, and then it's like it's always been in my mind even before kind of like the LLM area, which is like things are just so much more relevant when it's unique to you versus something off the shelf. That's true across the board. That's true again in education, right? Think about like course content. Like we're very bullish on this idea of like personalized learning. So me and you are different.
Yes.
You have prereqs on being a great podcaster that I don't have, right? So when I take a podcasting course, I need a little more hand holding and effort versus otherwise. That's where I think all this stuff is inevitably headed. Where that applies in assessment is our idea of problems. So we stay
Yeah.
away from what a lot of people in the industry call like library problems. We don't have a giant library of 3,000 tests and you can pick problem
Yeah.
2,731.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that because A, that problem is online and shared by other customers. B,
Yeah.
it's really boring for your candidate. Again, those students at Starbucks are definitely going to take that problem and pump it in because it's just busy work. You know what I mean? So instead, what we do is we take a job description or we take even just like a natural language description of here's what I want to serve. We are a bank here in New York. We're going to hire for our fraud department. We need software engineers who pay great attention to detail and are able to look through like very long CSV files.
Yep.
What ropes will do, and our secret sauce is how we do it. But we'll take a bunch of dev agents essentially, and we'll turn this kind of description into what we call a draft of a problem. And that draft is going to have an instruction for the candidate. So it's going to say, here are the major moments. Here's what we want you to do, right? You do this. Here's the repo. Here's what's already provided. Here's
Yep.
your task. And then there's going to be a bunch of boilerplate. So everything the candidate needs to solve the problem. And in engineering, that's going to be a bunch of code, right? But you could imagine in Excel, that's, I don't know, an existing model, right? Usually we want to give candidates something and ask them to make some tweaks or edits. But yeah, that custom part of the platform is obviously good for employers, keeps the problem safe. It's a hell of a lot more relevant. You're actually like testing what you care about, right? But for the candidate side, it's just like a lot more interesting, right? It's actually
Yeah.
engaging. It pitches, hey, come take a look at this repo. Come take a look at what it would be like to work on the job versus go solve these homework problems. You know?
Yeah. And then are you using AI to actually assess the performance on the back end as well?
Yeah, we are. Again, think about what we went back to earlier, which is a lot of the signal or a lot of the insights that come out of the interview are not just
Mhm.
in can you
The end
solve the
result.
problem well, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's in the thought process, right? It's in how you
Yeah.
got there. That's why we run so many live interviews. Is watching somebody work very quickly gives you good read on their abilities.
Yeah.
Ropes does the same. So there's no human on the phone, but we watch how people work in our workspace. We literally look at
Mhm.
how folks approach a problem or what they do when something goes wrong, right? And then we summarize that at the end and we make it available for evaluators. What that does, again, we frame it as we want to be fair for candidates. That's my
Yeah.
number one goal. And then obviously number two, we want it's a business, right? But our bet is that if we can build the best platform for candidates, evaluators will have to adopt it and will want to adopt it. But anyway, I bring that up because there are cases where I'm an engineer. I took some of these old tests, right? And I know how to solve the problem, but the syntax draws me up, or I can't pass one test
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
of this, right? Does that mean I'm a bad engineer? Probably not. So there are cases where people get into that zone. They do really well, but they can't just figure something out. But even though they might not scored very well in the end result, the thought process looked really great. And those people might
Yeah. Yeah.
pass, in otherwise cases they won't. But yeah, to answer your question, yes, we're looking at how people solve problems. It's a key part of the platform.
And that's again for listeners, breaking down what Ken's done here, right? They've used AI to create these unique customized tests. They're using AI to assess the test. And then you look at the human element. You don't necessarily need the human in the interview trying to assess which allows for much greater scale as well. And that's the way to start thinking about problems, and which could be in your own company, could be a new business, but that's the new and novel way you got to think about this stuff is how can I solve this existing problem or job to be done with AI in a way better way. But the other thing I'm curious too was playing around with an idea because the AI voice agents are getting very good.
Yes.
I don't know if you how much you've been playing with them lately. And people can say, "Oh, I can still tell it's AI." But back to your point earlier, they're going to progress. You just need to
Correct.
just know that they're going to get better. I think it was
Correct.
Sam Altman that said, "If your product gets better as we get better, meaning AI or whatever tool you're using, then you're in a good lane." Another idea is with the actual like first round interview, right? A human's time to go in, and I think there's plenty of companies probably trying to doing this now or whatnot, but a human to schedule the interview, figure out the time, conduct the interview, do research before the interview, do the assessment after the interview, voice versus a voice agent that has the context and can do it, right? So that frees up a ton of time for the human. And then it's also a better experience in some ways for the candidate because they don't have to wait 2 weeks to do an interview. They could literally do it right away,
Right.
which also allows you to assess more candidates. But that, again, there's just so many things that can be refined in terms of how we do it. But I'm curious, like the voice agent stuff, have y'all played with that at all? I don't know if that necessarily gets into what you're doing with the assessments, but what's your take on like voice agents and where they're going?
Yeah, I think voice agents as a technology first, like super exciting. The stuff coming out of like 11 Labs and Labs and all that stuff is nuts. And I totally agree with you. Like even today, it may have some shortcomings. Like it'll be there soon.
Yeah.
You're going to see applications across all verticals. I think like sales is a huge one. Support's obviously a huge one, and recruiting like definitely will have interesting applications. So I think that space is interesting. We haven't touched it a ton, partially because what we have is working, partially because
It's
you
a
know
different modality too, right? Because it's really the engineer doing the test where you don't really need a voice agent in that process, I guess, right?
Exactly. I would say in the engineering use case, people prefer it. People prefer not to have it. We hear this from engineers a lot. Like it's hard to talk about my thought process and solve something. We prefer to
Oh, that's interesting.
just you don't have to talk. We can just
Yeah.
implicitly see what you're thinking about through how you approach a problem. So that's one angle. The bigger thing for us is there is, I think in the business, you want to be either like cutting costs or you want to be increasing revenue, right? You want to be on one of these two ends. And I think like you can definitely argue reps cuts costs, we can replace live interviews, that sort of thing. But really what we focus on is revenue generation, whether that's an
Yeah.
in-house team, right? And we're able to assess way more candidates at once and find you a greater set of engineers, or
Mhm.
certainly on the staffing side where folks basically use us as like a core competency to go and place candidates and boost their offering versus competitors. Like we like being in areas where people can use ropes to go win big contracts or
Yeah.
grow a better team, right? So I think there's interesting applications there. We have our hands full with what we've currently got going on, but yeah, I think in general, it's a safe bet that these tools are going to keep getting better and better and better.
Yeah. One or two other things for you. So one, obviously, you haven't just built an AI solution. You're building with AI, and I think you mentioned Cursor is kind of your go-to tool. Like,
Yep.
what is that? How are you using AI in the development process? What does your um, process look like in terms of how you're using it? I'm just curious from engineers that are now very much natively using these tools within their everyday. What does that look like for you? Any like interesting nuggets or nuance in terms of how you interact with some of these AI native IDEs?
Yeah, I think the better question is like, where don't we use it?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's a huge difference. I think probably if you wanted to judge my speed ups personally, like in the dev world from using LLMs, I'm going to put it like 1.5x, maybe higher.
Wow.
Than that. Like,
So like another human and a half almost.
yeah, it's a
Two
huge
and a half Kens.
difference. Uh, so again, from a dev perspective, using it everywhere. The one I think is more interesting. The one area I would try my best not to use AI. It's
Mhm.
very tempting to use it is email. So when you receive an
Oh, really?
email from my handle, it's coming from me. It's not coming
Mhm.
from Claude speaking for me or what have you. Uh, and it's very tempting, honestly, to go use LLMs because I have a lot of email. That's basically where I
Yeah.
stay. But you know, to me, email is thinking. Like when I'm writing an email to you, I'm saying, "Hey, I'm super excited for this podcast. Here's what I want to talk about, right? Or here's what I think we should go with this." Like I'm not, it's not me blasting off. And sure, you're going to get the message, but really, what's valuable of that is like the process of me thinking, what should we talk about, right?
Mhm.
What would people find interesting? Um, so that's an area that again, the value is not the text that I send across email. It's the thought
Yeah.
process that went into like preparing it. So I try my best to keep it away from email at all costs. Yeah, you get an email from me, came from these hands, but yeah, everything else, the dev side, sales side, looking over meetings or what have you, LLMs are extremely helpful, and they'll only be more so later this year. Sure, that's
Yeah, that's awesome. One specific question I got, 'cause I've gotten this from a few different folks and a
yeah,
few different takes,
yeah,
but in Cursor specifically,
yeah.
and for those that don't know what Cursor is, an AI coding tool, integrated development environment. But there's the chat you have with the agent, right? And if it starts to go on too long, it can start to go off the rails, a little bit of hallucinating, and there's this pain point of like, okay, when do I start a new chat and kind of start fresh? And then, okay, I got to get the new chat agent up to speed on kind of where we are. Um, any thoughts on that in like your approach or process of like when you actually start a new chat? Do you start a new chat? Uh, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's actually the example that I was thinking of when we were talking about, like, evaluating someone's AI skills. Like, you could
Oh
imagine
wow.
s
Okay.
hey, it's like, when do you cut that off? Do you know how to
Yeah.
'cause for better or for worse, that stuff happens. These models are not perfect.
Hmm.
It is a bit sad when you're really cooking with a chat interface and then it starts
Yes.
to go off the rails, right? I think I've kinda just developed, like, a natural tendency on, like, the right time to go switch over, but I
Yeah.
definitely
Yeah.
the only other thing I'll say is when I'm about to switch over, sometimes I'll say, "Okay." It's weird. These models are like my friends, so I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna
Yeah.
go. I don't tell them I'm going to a new model. I'm just like, hey, I'm gonna go bring this to like a smart friend.
Yep.
Uh, can you write everything we talked about so far in as much detail as you? So you basically get this like really long page, just like context, and then I'll paste that into the new chat and kind of get moving. That just helps like kind of speed up some sorts of things.
Yep. Yep.
But yeah, you just develop a tendency. I mean, my advice to everybody that I talk to, from developers here to people who are not technical at all to people who are just touching AI, it's just like use the tools, use Perplexity, go
Hmm.
use ChatGPT, go use Card, and if you use it for a week and you don't like it, fine, that's totally okay, right? But
Yeah.
that's where the biggest advantage is gained today. It's just like people who know how to use tools will drive much faster because as much as it's 1.5x today, I think next year it might be 2 or two and a
Yeah.
half, 3, right? And you want to be in a place to command that.
It very much is this hurdle of like, or flow of, oh my God, this is amazing. Oh, this thing sucks. Oh my God, it's amazing. You kind of
Yep.
go through this like sequence of emotions. But with
Always.
the chat
Always.
specific, yeah, with any tool, and even outside of AI, but like the chat thing specifically, you mentioned it's like sad when it starts to degrade. It's like it's slowly getting drunk, like it's taking more
Yes.
shots of tequila. You got to like cut it
Yes.
off.
You're like, take it
Um,
easy.
yeah, but one thing that somebody I was talking to yesterday, the way they do it, very like modular in nature. It's like they do one feature, then they just go to a new chat, and that's kind of their working process.
Interesting.
But I love the idea you mentioned of like, okay, give me the context. I'm gonna take that to the other one. But it is weird. I have the same habit. Like you almost get like connected in a sense with the agent you're working with. You tell it stuff you don't need to tell it, but you do because it feels like you're almost working with a human. Which I would tell people like take that approach because if you act like you're working with a human, you're gonna provide better context. You're gonna
Yep.
have better interactions
Yep.
versus like thinking you're working with like a SaaS product and you're just like punching stuff in, you know?
It's all about the thought process, just like you would form a thought to go tell your friend or something, right?
Yeah,
It's the same deal here. Last thing I'll say is I
exactly.
would disagree. I would build multiple features in the same thread. Do that
Yeah. Okay,
because
cool.
as you get more things correct and as you start making progress, very unintuitive, I think, but like your models would perform better. This is where you see sometimes
Uh,
tricks like you're the best scientist in the world, right? Like if the model sees that you're getting value out of what they're saying, like it's almost like a confidence building thing or something. So
yeah.
when you're on a roll, keep it rolling.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah, I
these are
like that.
the things to pick
And
up.
that's the thing right now too, is like there's no perfect way to do this. There's no like handbook of like, hey, this is how you do, which I
It's
kind
not.
of like. There's
It's
lots
not
of
anymore.
new ways to do it. But I feel like Cursor's got to figure that out to where like it should just know like, and not the user shouldn't even have to switch over a chat. It just kind of resets in a sense, and it just like does it all on the back end. But
Very
maybe
cool.
that'll come at some point.
Cool guys.
But yeah, last thing I got, you mentioned you were at the Ed Tech conference or something like that. But back to like the Starbucks example, was there anything unique you see coming on the education front? Like, I feel like there's something around this individualized learning that needs to be unlocked and would
Yeah,
be
listen,
really beneficial.
I think people know there's a problem here, right? I think
Yeah.
it takes time for like these things to kind of migrate over. And as the problem becomes more visceral, so as LLMs keep getting better and better, I think the
Yeah.
urge that will continue. I think there's a
Mhm.
lot of very interesting stuff kind of going on, whether it's, again, personalized learning is something I really believe in. Uh, in some areas of education, like a writing, I think like it's the wrong place to just like go wild on AI tools. We have the
Mhm.
benefit of we sit in the workforce, right? We're very application based. Therefore, I think it's
Yeah.
the right place. But these things in kind of like the education space are kind of somewhere in between. So
Yeah.
uh, I think it'll take a little bit of time to like see the big impact there, but people are definitely thinking about it. And it's really important, I think, for the future of the world and all sort of. It would be a weird few years, but I'm excited.
Yeah. Ken, thanks for being on Talking AI. And you just got a new funding round too, which is awesome. Y'all are growing quickly, but let us know where people can find you, where they can find Ropes, where they can learn more.
Yeah, no, super exciting moment. We did just add on new funding. We got a new New York office here, which we're excited about.
Nice.
Yeah, if you're a software developer, you're technical in New York, we'd love to chat with you. We're hiring for pretty much all fields. And yeah, if you're interviewing, you can use Ropes. You can find our site at ropes.ai. You can find me on LinkedIn too, at Ken Schumacher, just the company at Ropes. Yeah, super awesome hopping on. Excited to connect with everybody.
Awesome. Yeah. And highly recommend everybody checking it out. Thanks, Ken.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Talking AI podcast. If you enjoyed the show, give us a follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to leave us a review. We love those. For more info on Talking AI, visit talkingaipodcast.com.